All right. Welcome, everybody. Today on the show, we're joined by Dr. Alexandra Muñoz, a molecular toxicologist and outspoken advocate for public health. Dr. Muñoz has dedicated her career to studying how chemicals like glyphosate can damage our cells and disrupt our hormones, and why so many health risks never make it onto product labels. She's become a leading voice challenging pesticide liability shields, provisions that could give chemical manufacturers sweeping immunity even when new science shows their products harm people and the environment. We'll dive into why these shields matter, what the research really says about glyphosate and other pesticides, and what it will take to make our food and water safer. Welcome, doctor. Thank you for joining today. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's important to talk about this.
I'm just a big fan of your work in North Carolina. State by state, they've been coming for these liability shields, and you were part in fighting them back there. Can you share for people who aren't aware, what are these pesticide liability shields that they're going for?
Yeah. So these are pieces of legislation that have been proposed essentially by the company Bayer, which purchased Monsanto. And they put forward this legislation in a number of states this year. And all the legislation has been designed to essentially stop them from being liable in these failure to warn lawsuits that they've been facing for the health impacts, for the cancer causing impacts of their product, Roundup. And now they've created a provision at the federal level, and they're trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, this is just, I'm thinking that these pesticides are, the main culprit for our health deficits, maybe after some of these recent mRNA products. But yeah, so this is really, I've been hoping that we're going to use less of these pesticides. I look to other countries in the West and we're using way more than they are. And so, yeah, this is really concerning. So I know it's not just glyphosate and not just pesticides, but can you speak to some of the other poisons that this would give a liability shield to in this way?
Yeah. So even though this legislation has a lot of times been framed around glyphosate and Roundup, the fact is that the way that they're changing the liability shield is they're regulating things related to FIFRA. And so FIFRA is the act that empowers the EPA and determines all of the registration of these products. And under FIFRA, right now at the EPA, there are 1,200 active ingredients that are registered. So 1,200 different chemicals that are designed to be toxins that are used in these products. And that also applies, those active ingredients are being used in over 57,000 products that are on the market right now. And that includes things like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, rodenticides, things that kill bacteria. So any type of disinfectant wipe or different disinfectant spray is going to be under FIFRA's regulation. And it will be given this liability shield if this type of legislation goes through. And so we're talking about a really wide variety of products that not just farmers use, but that families use, that kids are exposed to. This is incredibly concerning to me as a toxicologist.
Absolutely. And liability shield, it kind of sounds a bit innocuous. I kind of prefer the term license to kill. And it really is it's a suspension of our constitutional rights to due process, to hold these manufacturers accountable in court. We've had such a hard time getting other products pulled and getting accountability, like tobacco and asbestos and lead, and we didn't have these liability shields. So how much worse would it be now if we grant these? So yeah, really, it's wild, isn't it? You were talking earlier. This is like even just different household products like ant ant killer, and I would suppose even like you know right now a lot of people are concerned about chemicals in sunscreen and in our mosquito repellent, and a lot of these chemicals they would all be covered this way. Is that right?
Yeah, I think mosquito repellent probably falls under the FIFRA regulation. Anything that kills a bug or an ant or a plant or bacteria or mold is going to be affected by this legislation. So it's a huge variety of common household things that we're talking about here. And a lot of times the legislation is just framed as impacting farmers and providing them with essential crop protection tools, but that's not the case at all. This regulates over 57,000 products. And so it is a really wide piece of legislation. And I agree with you. We shouldn't be calling it a liability shield. That does sound really innocuous. This is violating constitutional rights. It's definitely going to make it so much harder to hold these companies accountable for the health impacts of their products, which is part of what's so concerning to me, is that this is an industry that we know is already willing to sell products that cause cancer without a cancer label, even after they've been sued for it many times, even after they've paid millions of dollars in damages to people that have been harmed by it. Even after just all of this has happened, they're still willing to violate people's right to informed consent and sell a product that causes cancer without the proper warning label. What are they going to sell when they know they can't be sued?
Exactly, exactly. Right. We've seen vaccine liability shields or with vaccines, we've seen these liability shields in 1986, and the amount of vaccines pushed on kids has gone up fivefold at least, depending on how you look at it. And yet, these products you're talking about, these are coming from overseas, right? This is the German company Bayer and ChemChina. So this is just really really unbelievable that our representatives are letting this happen. And can you speak to that? Like how is this allowed? Is this just purely through lobbying?
Yeah, I think this is definitely through a massive amount of money that this is happening, right? So this passed this a format of this legislation passed already in North Dakota and Georgia this year. And there is so much money behind this thing. You know, they have many lobbyists working in each state on it this year. Before they even started lobbying for it, they had ads going talking about how safe and essential glyphosate is. They had billboards around it all over farm country, you know, just saying how great glyphosate is. And they've essentially convinced the farmers that use glyphosate that if they don't get this protection from lawsuits for the harmful impacts of their products, that they're going to go out of business and that those farmers won't have access to glyphosate and that then there'll be a global food shortage. And that's the narrative that they've been pushing across all of these states. And that when I was speaking to representatives, they repeated directly back to me. They were like, these are frivolous lawsuits that are going on against Roundup. This is totally a totally safe product, which it's not. And that they want to protect this industry or else there's not going to be enough food for everyone. And I just couldn't believe that this is how it's being framed, how a lot of people are believing that it's true. So they're getting these farmers to call the representatives and tell them, hey, we really want this protection for this company. Otherwise, we're going to lose our businesses. And there are just so many pieces of that narrative that are completely untrue. The first one being that glyphosate is safe. Glyphosate is not safe, and glyphosate based formulations, glyphosate based herbicides like Roundup, do cause cancer. And I've personally reviewed the data because there was so much controversy around it. And the molecular mechanisms of how this happens are really clear. And there's really strong animal evidence showing that these things are carcinogenic. There's that most recent Ramazzini paper that shows that even low doses are very dangerous and cause multiple forms of cancer. And there's really strong epidemiologic evidence in populations of humans that have been exposed, showing that there's an increased risk for non Hodgkin's lymphoma when they're exposed to these glyphosate based herbicides. So the idea that they're just going around lying, saying that it's safe, is just unbelievable to me. And that's the basis for what they're doing. But they're also lying about the fact that glyphosate won't be available to farmers if they do go out of business. Glyphosate's not patented. And there's other companies that sell glyphosate formulations. So the whole narrative is just completely constructed in order to block them from all of these pending lawsuits that they're facing right now.
Right. They're happy to pay. I say that because they've agreed, in a settlement to pay, $11 billion for causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, this is just a homeowners using Roundup in their lawns and gardens. This isn't, to farmers, because farmers are exposed to so many chemicals. It's harder to prove the causation. This isn't to people who are eating glyphosate, which glyphosate is getting so pervasive. It's in 80% of our urine. Um, so yeah, it's just, and they're still selling it at the hardware stores, right? So they're, where they've had to pay billions and billions of dollars, they're still selling it. So
They're
there's no
still
way,
selling it.
if they'll pull it there well before they'll take it away from farmers. So it's a complete lie, of complete fabrication again. And yeah, why would they pay $11 billion for causing cancer if they really didn't believe they caused cancer? They would appeal and appeal and appeal, and they'd still be fighting it today. But
Yeah, because they know that it does cause cancer. We've seen the internal documents where they're intentionally trying to hide the toxicologist studies, where they're saying, "Oh, we can't talk to this toxicologist anymore because we know that he wants to ask this question and do this study and we can't let that happen." And that's from decades ago at this point. There's a lot of evidence showing this now, and it's very clear that this is not a safe chemical, especially at the molecular level. It creates oxidative stress. It causes DNA double strand breaks, and then those DNA double strand breaks aren't repaired, which causes the formation of micronuclei. And that's a really clear indicator that this is damaging DNA. And when you've got something that's damaging DNA at that level, causing DNA double strand breaks, it's a carcinogen.
unbelievable, the way that we can be propagandized by these big money interests. That's why it's so important, that people are calling in now. I know, we've got senators. We've got a big vote coming up Tuesday about this Section 453, where we're asking people to call in and leave a voicemail, and this is how we can be heard about this. And I'm going to have the list to that in the comments. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so Section 453 was introduced or just earlier this week on Monday, as part of this giant appropriations bill that has, I think, 200 pages of different things in it. And it's just one little section called pesticides. And it's essentially doesn't even read like a liability shield or immunity. And so a lot of times there's confusion about that. But I've checked with a lot of lawyers and we've taken some time to really understand what it is. And it is going to function in the same way. So the outcome will be the same. These companies are going to be protected from lawsuits with Section 453. So it's pretty critically important that everyone kind of take some time this week before this vote on Tuesday, to this weekend, I guess, to call the representatives, leave voice messages, send a batch email. There's a link on my website for how to do that, and really flood them with the fact that we don't want this, that this is not okay. This is violating constitutional right to due process. It's, blocking funding for labeling updates, and it's incredibly problematic. So the vote on Tuesday is going to be in the Interior Appropriations Committee, and hopefully a representative is going to put forward an amendment to remove Section 453 from this giant bill. And so we're going to actually need representatives to vote in support of that amendment and 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 ask for this piece to be removed.
Yeah, here, here. And yeah, guys, it's super easy. Just call, leave a quick voicemail. There's a script, and if you do get to talk to somebody, that's nice too. But yeah, call over the weekend if you don't want to talk to anybody. It's want to leave a voicemail. And yeah, what else can people do to help out the cause this way?
Well, I think it's so important that we get the word out about this because the media is not covering it. I checked this morning if there were any articles about it, and I did a couple different searches. And in the first search, my Instagram post came up first, and I was like, "That's not great news," because I don't have that many followers. So if that's coming up first, then we know there's a problem. And then I did another search and it was two other health influencers posts that came up. So Section 453 isn't being talked about right now. And that's kind of critically important, is that we get the word out to more people, because we need media attention on this. We need pressure on the representatives to understand that this is an important issue, that it's a voting issue. And we need them to also understand the full impact of this legislation because right now they don't. And so, if you can take some time to just learn about it a little bit more and start communicating with them about it in emails, especially if you're a direct constituent of anyone on the Appropriations Committee, on the Interior Appropriations Committee, that would be really important. If you're a direct constituent of any of those people and you're listening to this, then really take some time and craft an email letting them know that you're their constituent, that you don't support this, and if you want to help in any other way, you can make phone calls to them, try to get a meeting with them, and we can help you take that meeting if you're able to get one this week. The more that we can communicate to them that their direct constituents don't want this, the more impactful we're going to be also.
Here, here. Yeah, we got to step up and get the word out. I'm surprised that this isn't a bigger deal. I think everything's on the line right now. You look at, the peer reviewed research just for glyphosate alone, there's over 5,000 studies that show this stuff is super toxic. I think one that really resonates with people, though, is the fertility risks. And I know, you know a bit about that. Could you describe some of the fertility issues that we're seeing?
So there's been a lot of decline in fertility right now happening population wide throughout the world. There's been a 50% decline in sperm count rates.
Right.
And, it's hard to say exactly which chemicals are causing that, but I think it's a combination of everything. And the exposure to pesticides and herbicides is definitely playing a role in that globally. And when we're looking at this space of chemicals that's regulated under FIFRA, we're looking at a group of chemicals that we know has certain features, right? A lot of these chemicals have already been identified as endocrine disrupting chemicals in academic peer reviewed literature. The EPA is not necessarily acknowledging that literature right now, but the academic peer reviewed literature is well aware of the fact that, for example, glyphosate is androgenic, which means that it acts like a testosterone type of chemical. And it definitely is impacting the proper sexual development of children. And there's a number of studies showing that certain features that indicate an endocrine disrupting chemical is present and have affected children in human populations have been published in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And this is incredibly important. I think that we're still in the process of fully understanding these endocrine disrupting chemicals and exactly which pesticides are involved. But there's a lot of evidence mounting right now showing that glyphosate is an endocrine disrupting chemical that's very important, and a number of other pesticides are also involved in that. And so when we're concerned about fertility, when we're concerned about children's proper sexual development, then the idea that we suddenly remove accountability from an industry that clearly doesn't care about people's health and that is already selling endocrine disrupting chemicals without any warnings on them is absolutely mind boggling to me. This is going to make the problem of infertility much worse. And the fact of the matter is that this legislation is going to apply to all future chemicals. And that's the other part that's really scary about this, is that this is going to apply to anything new that they want to bring onto the market, which means that in 50 years from now, in 100 years from now, if this is still in place, which it very well could be, then the types of damaging chemicals that could be sold could wipe out the fertility of the next generation if it's not already happening. And so, when we sort of imagine what can happen in the extreme situation of this, or if a foreign adversary takes advantage of this type of legislation and intentionally designs something that can intentionally harm children's fertility, that doesn't seem like it's doing anything until 10, 20 years later because you can't tell when that's happening, this could be a space that opens, this legislation can be something that opens the door for absolutely terrible biological warfare. And we really need to think about that when we're considering this type of legislation because it's removing accountability from foreign companies, from companies that are in countries that are foreign adversaries. This is going to give a liability shield to ChemChina. What are they going to produce when they have a liability shield, when they know that they can get an EPA approved label easily with no warnings on it? I think this is so unwise.
It's crazy, isn't it? So, ChemChina, they produce paraquat, which is banned in 50 countries, including China. And this is one of the chemicals that, of course, are, allowed on our crops here that we're getting exposed to. Yeah, and then that's the other point about a lot of these chemicals. The glyphosate is we're these are banned in dozens of countries, lots of municipalities. I'm from a red state, Florida, where we've banned it for use by the city in a dozen different counties. So these effects are widely known and understood. The EPA right now, interestingly, is citing research that should be retracted. This is some of the research that you kind of alluded to that came to be understood from the Monsanto papers. That these studies were being effectively ghostwritten. That was their own words. That to save money, that they were just kind of writing the study and having an expert sign off on it. And so this is the kind of fraud that's happening, and that's still this is like what's being cited is known fraud for these poisons allegedly being safe, supposedly being safe for us. So.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the whole situation is such a mess, but that's such an important point, right? They've literally ghostwritten papers from their industry. We have seen the emails proving that they wrote these papers, and they've flooded the literature with sort of these inaccurate tests to prove that their thing is safe when it's definitely not. And this is the data that they have submitted to the EPA in order to get their label that doesn't warn about the health risks of the products. And that's really the other key factor here is that under FIFRA, which is the act that regulates the registration of these products at the EPA, under FIFRA, companies are required to submit their own data. And there are so many ways that these companies can and do structure their studies in a way to avoid showing important toxicological information. And there's so many ways that we've seen that they commit fraud in order to avoid showing the relevant or real information about their products. So the system is already in a really bad place, right? Many of the existing EPA approved labels on these products do not reflect the peer reviewed scientific literature. They do not warn about the actual health risks of these products. And now these companies are trying to get those labels that are based on inaccurate information, on fraudulent data, codified as the truth and use it essentially as a defense in court for all of these lawsuits. So it's a terrible situation.
It's so unbelievable. You talk about how bad the situation is. My big hope for this movement of Kennedy getting in there and making us healthy again is that we would actually get some progress here on these pesticide issues. We're using more than 10 times what Europe's using, and we're about 10 times sicker for it. And the one big thing that I think that we could hope for would be to quit spraying toxic desiccants on our crops at harvest. So we're spraying glyphosate and sometimes paraquat on our grains, on our beans at harvest. So it's getting in our oats, on our bread, in our chickpeas, in our hummus, and our on and on. And no other country does this almost. This is banned in just about all of Europe. And it's different. You spray a little poison on the ground to kill the weed next to the plant. Okay, is that safe for us? Maybe, maybe not. You spray it directly on the food after it's grown, all the way at harvest to help dry it out. That's crazy, and
It's
we got
absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I can't even wrap my head around that usage of it, right? Like for convenience, we're just putting toxins directly onto the plants to dry them out. How does that make any sense? How is that
it's
safe?
bizarre. It's unbelievable, and right, we just have a really crazy situation we're up against. But yeah, if we let this liability shield go into place, how much harder is it going to be to get some action on some of these issues we're up against? And I think that we need to take this momentum and kind of turn it on its foot. They've got us on our back foot now. It needs to be kind of like a judo maneuver. Use this energy against them to kind of raise awareness about everything we're up against and demand that we quit using so much of these poisons on the food that we're eating. And yeah, we can't turn this off overnight. It would take 5-6 years to phase out some of these poisons we're using, but we got to start somewhere. And then there's some real low hanging fruit. People estimate that up to 80% of our exposure is coming from this use as a desiccant at harvest. And a lot of times, why are they doing this? They're doing it to maximize profits, make the harvest a little easier. Sometimes they're growing wheat in a place where maybe they shouldn't be growing it, where the seasons are a little shorter. They want to hurry up before the rains get there. Well, we can just grow wheat in the other places where it's makes a little more sense. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's definitely some changes that can be made um, in shorter time frames, but I don't know the exact specifics of these businesses and how they operate. And I try to be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of American farmers that have businesses structured around these things, and we've got to be understanding about that too. We've got to have a conversation with everyone, really, because it's going to take everyone's cooperation to actually make these changes. And but from a scientific perspective, I think that you know from a toxicological perspective, I think that it's absolutely urgent that we start making changes. And I think that this immunity provision is definitely going to make things worse, and it's definitely going to make things a lot harder to change, especially the way Section 5. I keep forgetting the numbers.
it's
the
Section 453. Yeah.
the way Section 453 is structured. It's actually the worst version of this legislation that I've seen so far, because it actually does more than just give these companies immunity in court. It blocks funding for label updates on these products. So right now, the companies theoretically could request that a warning be added to their product if they came up with new research. Um, but with this provision, it's going to block funding for even that type of change. And that's actually how it creates the immunity. That's why it's so sneaky. But when you think about it from a toxicology perspective, it's blocking the inclusion of new scientific literature, which guarantees that these labels are going to have outdated information on it. It guarantees that. And that's, to me, the most also just absolutely terrifying about this piece.
Right. This goes back to informed consent, right? We
Mm-hmm.
we it'd be nice if we could get back to let the food be the medicine. Well, right now our food is so toxic, and we can't even be informed about the real dangers of it. So, I wanted to talk to you about testing for glyphosate. We're relying on third party groups like Moms Across America and EcoWatch. It just blows my mind that you talk about the science of this stuff. How can we be up to speed on it and be doing real science when we're not doing regular testing from the FDA about how bad or the amount of pesticides that are in the food that we're eating.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that area yet, but I think, of course, it makes sense that we need to test things to see what's actually in them, because right now, the way all of the regulations are structured, they're not protecting people. And when people do run tests on different things, they're finding all kinds of pesticides and different types of contaminants, different types of toxins in these products, and there's no way to protect people, especially to protect children, if you have labels that are inaccurate, right? There's this lack of informed consent on the labeling. There's a lack of enforcement of the regulations that have been agreed upon. The threshold values that are set are usually way higher than what scientists would actually recommend. And then when people test them, they're finding these values, these high levels of different things. And so there's problems across the whole spectrum of this space in terms of the regulation, right? This is not just one problem that we need to solve. There's many problems that we need to solve, and this legislation is just going to make it all so much worse.
You brought up a great point there about how are these you know levels set at. Well, they're set by industry. So the industry goes to the EPA and says, "Listen, this is what we want it set at." So whatever amount of pesticides are using, and so this is what happened with glyphosate recently. Is like they're using a lot more of it. There's a lot more of it in the food we're eating from its use as a desiccant. So they go to the EPA and say, "Hey, listen, we need to up that by about sevenfold, and that's exactly what happened. So right, these levels aren't being set by science or people looking out for us. They're being set by the industry who are profiting off the poison's use. So
Yeah. And there's a great example of that actually with BPA. I don't know if you've looked into that at all. So bisphenol A is also an endocrine disrupting chemical, and there's a mounting body of evidence showing how incredibly dangerous it is for children's development, for so many different things. It's kind of astounding, actually. It can contribute to diabetes, and BPA is found in a lot of plastics, so hard plastics leach BPA into foods. It's also found on the inside of aluminum cans a lot of times. A lot of plastic coatings can have BPA in it. And so there was a there was a review done by scientists in collaboration with the EPA. So with the FDA. The FDA set up a panel of academic scientists and industry scientists to come together and do this study called Clarity BPA. And it was a multi-year study. They had all these different tests designed, and they at the end of it, the academic scientists found that, okay, the level of BPA that's currently set as allowable is way too high, and they recommended a very low level that would be safe. And the FDA just completely ignored their data, their analysis, their recommendations, and went ahead and set the level that the industry wanted. And a lot of these scientists got very upset about it and have published papers explaining what happened during this study, during this process, recommending that the level be much lower. And so, I think that a lot of times there's distrust for scientists growing right now. But I think when you really look at and speak to the scientists that are directly working on these toxins, that are in academia, that are outside of industry, they genuinely want to protect people, and they're genuinely trying to do the right research and make proper recommendations. And those recommendations are being ignored by the regulatory industries. That happened at the FDA with BPA. It also happened with glyphosate at the EPA. They also ignored academics' assessment of it that were submitted. And so this is a huge problem. It's just they're ignoring the data. They're ignoring the real scientists that are working on this, and they're trusting the industry that is clearly deceiving them.
exactly, and yeah, it's like you said, they're just lying all the way through. Their whole reasoning for a lot of this is it's just we can't grow our food without this poison. And then, yeah, no other country's using this much poison. It's never been so easy to grow our food responsibly. And when we do grow our food responsibly, we're investing in our soils. We're taking care of the bees. Our bees are in a massive decline right now due to these sort of chemicals. The pollinators, the fish in the sea. We got dead zones in the Gulf because of the runoff of these sort of poisons. And yeah, so there's just so many reasons to be doing things the right way, and we have the means, we have the technology, and this is one thing that I'm glad about, that we're in different countries. We can look at one another and see who's doing things better, and we can look to other countries that are way healthier, and yeah, their food is still affordable. So it's high time we make the transition to using less of these chemicals. And so yeah, their very reasoning is just it's gaslighting at its base, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Doctor, or go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you about the gaslighting. just
It's unreal. It's
it's
unreal. What do they say? They say you say anything again and again, they're gonna believe you. That's one tool of like the kind of the brainwashing is. So safe and effective.
mhm.
Safe. It's
Yeah,
just
and they create doubt, right? That's their other main strategy, is to craft doubt. And so that's why they've published all of these ghostwritten papers and repeated studies that they know don't no don't show. They're sort of repeated this really irrelevant toxicology study for glyphosate over and over again to flood the literature with it, where it's just like, if you're a toxicologist and you look at it, well, you're like, okay, it was negative, next test. But instead, they just did it over and over and over again, so that there's all these papers showing that it's not negative on that one type of test. And so they're crafting doubt. That's their other huge strategy, is that they create all of this information that shows what they want it to show. They get scientists that are willing to sell out on the truth, that to publish things, and they publicly install this huge level of doubt, where there are people that don't know if it causes cancer now. And they're like, well, we did look at the literature and it did show this. And, if you don't have a totally deep understanding of this space of molecular toxicology, then it's easy to be deceived. But once you sort of look at the literature really carefully, and if you're trained to look at it, then there's no question about what's going on here. And but they're gaslighting everyone, and they're creating doubt. And together, those two things have been very powerful for their industry across the board for all of these toxins. It's so disrespectful to everybody that they're willing to manipulate people at this level and manipulate the population at this level in order to sell them things that they know are poisonous, that they know are toxic.
Right. And it's our kids that are the most vulnerable. It's our babies that are the most vulnerable. So this is just really tragic and a heinous kind of act that we're seeing. And then you talk about this playbook. It's just like big tobacco. It's just like big pharma owning the media, and it is, they vertically integrated it now, right? So it's a Bayer, the big pharma who makes money selling very expensive cancer treatments, has bought Monsanto, who clearly causes cancer. So it's just
Yeah, and it's even more direct than that. They sell the chemotherapeutic that treats non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is the exact type of cancer that Roundup causes. So they're selling the poison, the toxin that causes it, and the treatment for it. They're
this is
making
such a
money on
great
both sides.
this is such a great pushback when they say they're going to go out of business. It's like, no, no, no. You're making, how many billions off of your cancer treatment for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma? There's no way they're going to ever go out of business, right?
Mhm.
I think that this is maybe why they bought Monsanto, because Monsanto did have all these liabilities. A lot of people say, oh, well, it was a terrible purchase. Well, you know what? It helps Bayer keep selling these cancer treatments. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, it very well might be.
Well, anyways, thank you so much for everything you're doing, Doctor. Do you have any closing thoughts about any of this? Any call to action?
I guess I just want everyone, to really take a minute right now, if you're listening to this, and contact some of these representatives on the Appropriations Committee, especially the Republicans, because they're the ones that typically are in support of this, and let them know that you're opposed to it. Make those phone calls, leave the voice messages. And we've also got to start talking to the people that are claiming to be part of the Maha caucus in Congress. A lot of the Maha caucus, turns out, is very pro pesticide and may very well be pro this type of provision. So we need to communicate with them as well, and let them know that if they really are Maha, if they really want to make America healthy again, if they really want to protect fertility, if they really want to protect children's proper development, then they need to be opposed to this provision, because this provision is going to harm fertility and harm the next generation. And so they need to take a stand on it. They need to publicly denounce it. They need to ask leadership to remove it. There needs to be a lot of pressure on the Maha Caucus as well. So please, the contact information for them is also, I think we can maybe get that together on your site or however, but it's
Yeah.
on my
Well,
website. And sorry.
yeah. What is that website, Doctor? We'll make sure to put that in the
So
note.
my website is just my name, dralexandramunoz.com, /federal. And then the sort of batch email, you can just copy and paste a batch email to the staffers of the Maha Caucus and let them know that this is important for Maha. This is important for fertility. This is important for families. And they need to actively take a stance opposing this provision.
You're absolutely right, Doc. Well, thank you so much for coming today. Yeah, we've got to stand up for our constitutional rights. Everything's on the line right now. And yeah, these bad guys, they're the criminals, scandal after scandal after scandal they've been a part of. And we got to stand up about it. Our loved ones, the most vulnerable, are under threat. So yeah, let's make our food and medicine safe again.
Let's do it.
All right.